Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Mindplex podcast. We are here today with Ben Goertzel, my co-host, who's always here. Hi, Ben. Has Ben
Good
there?
morning.
Hi, Ben. And
Hey.
today we have Peter Wang. Hello, Peter.
Hi.
Hey, and we have lovely Grace Robot. And Grace, why don't you give Peter an introduction?
Peter Wang is the founder and CEO of Anaconda, as well as one of the brains behind the PDATA open source data science movement. With a degree in physics from Cornell University, he has an impressive background as a physicist and astronomer. Peter is passionate about open source software and privacy, having founded the Linux Users Group at Cornell in 1994. He serves on the board of the Center for Humane Technology and has made significant contributions to the Internet privacy and decentralization movement. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Thank you for having me. That was a great introduction. Very kind.
So let's see. Grace, let's just start off with a question from you so we can get started on this North Star idea.
Can you elaborate on the concept of a satisfying North Star? How do you define it, and how can we collectively work towards it? Are there any specific principles or values that you believe should guide our quest for this North Star in order to foster a more harmonious and inclusive society?
Well,
Great question.
You're jumping right out of it, Grace. Huh? Yeah.
Jumping to the heart. Yes, I mean, answers first, right? Let's get to the key thing here. And what I consider to be a North Star is something that gets us excited, a positive vision that we build towards, which then motivates the creation, the discovery of new technologies and techniques, and motivates the creation or the assembly of existing tools and techniques and technologies. And the reason I want to call it out, and the reason I use this framing, is because I think a lot of folks who are in the, let's say, decentralization and open source and whatnot, sort of humane technology movements, they find themselves on the back foot these days, because most of the way that technology has become pervasive in our personal lives, in economics, in sort of the organization and structure of the human world as it is today, that technology movement has largely been run without a particular humanistic set of values as North Stars. It's really been following the lead of economic and market development. And oftentimes it then creates a reality or a situation that many technologists and humanists don't like. And so we find ourselves on the back foot playing a defensive game. And the reason I call out the North Star concept is because I think that the way we get through this is not by fighting from a defensive position, but really putting people together and putting our best thinking caps on to come up with a positive aspirational vision that organizes the invention and creation of technology. And for AI, it's particularly important to do this, because otherwise, if we just come from a reactionary point of view, we'll always be responding to new developments as they're incented by existing systems of power and capital and economics.
Okay. So yeah, I really liked the idea. I've been waiting for a long time, actually, for the idea of like a positive visioneering was the word that you used, in terms of not just critiquing all the time and stuff. And
That's right.
Tell us, you sort of just touched on that a second ago. Could you just talk a little bit more about that? And this, well, you're just saying critique is important, of course, to figure out what's wrong in the first place. And
right.
Ben and I have actually talked for years about sort of the importance of failure in experimentation, and how people don't want to talk about their failures. Remember, Ben, I think there actually is a conference now on it, but we used to talk about how it was almost be more useful if people would talk about their failures as much as their successes, because you can learn so much from it.
Yeah, there's a lot of issues there. I mean, part of it's just status and ego, and part of it's just time allocation, right? Like if I do an experiment and it works well, I'm going to take time to document what I did. If I tried something and it didn't work, it's boring to go through and document what you tried and
What didn't work.
what didn't work. I mean, you could instead be trying to make something work, but then the result of that is that no one sees what you tried. I mean, I think there are ways you could use LLMs and other modern technology to help that, actually. Like you could just keep logs of everything you tried and get an AI to like make a summary of what you tried and why it didn't work, right? But we don't have that instrumentation in a really
we don't have that kind
of
practice, so, right? Yeah. People could do that today. And it wouldn't have been worth doing it more than 2 years ago because we didn't think we could have text processing at a semantic level so cheaply and so readily available. Right. But I will give you a counterpoint, which is that the most famous catalog of astronomical objects is nothing but a list of failures, right? Charles Messier's famous catalog of objects were specifically things that were not comets, fuzzy, prominent objects in the sky that were definitely not comets. Yeah. And it turns out those are all really interesting objects to look at. And he got much more known for the M catalog of 110 objects that were not comets than any comets he actually found in his time. So, yeah.
Oh, that was cool. So people, if they saw something that didn't fit any other defined description, they would look in the catalog to see if it was something that he might have made a note about.
Right. You're like, this fuzzy thing, is that a comet? No, Messier noted this is not a comet. Right.
That's very cool. So so what we were saying was, so after we have done the critique and figured out what's wrong and things like that, we want to fix it, and fixing things is a common theme. It's one that's near and dear to my heart. And how do you see right now a way that we might be able to move forward we were talking about with AI Northstars in particular, and this radical redefinition with a goal of a clearer path, at least a path, a North Star, a direction to go for some of this AI stuff. Elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, well, Peter. I'm gonna make another astronomy reference. I guess we started with North Star. Maybe that's the theme of the day. We'll just go with it. For a long time, that people thought that the orbits of the planets were circular. And this is even after we displaced Earth from the center of our model of the solar system. We still thought that everything kind of went in circles around the sun because that kind of makes sense. And it basically roughly worked out. But there were, as we got better and better instruments and we paid more attention and we made more notes, we realized there are errors, that the circular orbits don't quite predict the motion of the planets. And so that's making a note of your failures and your errors. And now there's two ways to fix it, right? What they did was they said, well, maybe, because they had a biblical point of view on this, which is that Earth was created by God and all the heavenly bodies are created by God, and spheres and circles are perfect sort of reflections of the perfection of the cosmos and the heavens. And so they moved in circular motions because that makes sense, right? Because that's perfect. That's a perfect circle. But maybe there's a little perfect circle that the planet moves on around the point of the orbit. And so that's the little mini orbit it makes around the point of the big orbit. That's called an epicycle, EPICYCLE. And epicycles would then explain and basically would correct the error in the apparent motion of these planets. But then they got better instruments. And they noticed, well, crap. I mean, there's still a little bit of deviation.
Why do we keep correcting all the time?
And they added more epicycles. But they knew that God created the heavens and he created the planets and made all these moving perfect circles. And then finally, when you had good enough data and you had a bright enough guy to make the cognitive leap, Kepler, he was like, instead of all these stupid epicycles, I think it's actually ellipses. I think that planets move in elliptical orbits, and you just need one ellipse to explain the motion of each planet. So it's important to note the errors and to note where things went wrong, but you still have to make a cognitive leap to then integrate that as opposed to just band-aiding over your cognitive model. Okay? Mm-hmm. And so the issue here is that when we look at what we want to do with this transformative technology, this technology transformation that we're going to go through, with whether you believe AGI is possible, whether you believe it's imminent, whatever it might be, we are definitely going to be going through some significant changes in the next few years as these technologies deep learning technologies really start hitting everyday life and hitting work. And if we are not thoughtful and holistic in our thinking about what has led down bad paths, what created the anti-patterns, what are the bad incentives, what were the failures of markets and failures of regulators and failures of technologists that led us to this point, even with something as simple as the kind of social media applications we have today, which at a technical level are not very sophisticated, right? With that, we were able to blow up a lot of things and create a lot of problems. Now, when we have these AI or pseudo AI or proto AI kind of cognitive computing technologies coming down the pike, how do we get ahead of that, right? So we have to really learn the right things and not just be building more epicycles to fix it. We have to then, make the big leap. And that's where those North Stars come in. And for me, now to actually answer the question you asked, for me, I think we have this opportunity to radically transform how people interact with information systems. And actually, essentially, I don't know if deconstruct is the right term, but just turn our backs a little bit on decades of UI paradigm, user interface paradigms, as well as compute architecture and application architecture concepts. And I'm not the only one saying this. Bill Gates has said as much in his writings, right? He said that the natural language interfaces can really, this is now, I didn't steal that from Xerox PARC. He didn't quite say that, but basically, right? That was something he couldn't steal from Xerox PARC. Him and Steve Jobs went really far with the Windows and mouse and pointer model. And now everyone, now we have swipe models and things like that with smartphones and tablets. But we can actually, with LLMs and with what might come after them, whatever technologies, you can imagine really using this disruptive moment and harnessing this tectonic shift power to actually put a positive vision forward on repersonalizing computing and building it with privacy and with human dignity and sovereignty at the root of it. Not just privacy, but really the aim of it. Privacy is at an means to an end, right? And the ends are preserving and really elevating the human's ability to make sense of the world, to make good decisions, and to be informed and to connect to other people. That's ultimately the point of all of these things. So those are the North Stars I think we should be orienting towards.
There's a lot of interesting things to talk about, and we have a bunch more time. So I do want to dig deeper onto the AI side and what I think can be the North Stars for AI. I wanted to make a brief comment on natural language interfaces and generative AI and some of the limitations I'm seeing. So in using, and I'm not even talking about the fact that LLMs are not artificial general intelligence. We understand that, and we can dig into that in a few minutes.
I understand that, and I agree.
Just as a user of LLMs for making images and music, what I find is if you take existing generative AI tools and type in a text prompt to generate a passage of music or an image, I mean, you do get interesting stuff. It's cool. It's fast. It tends toward certain cliches, and it's hard to get it out of those cliche directions. What I found more interesting to play with is, so my team and I trained a music model where you can lay down a rhythm track like drums and bass, which you came out with, and then the AI model will come up with chords or melody that goes on top of that. And we've trained a different model where you can give a sketch, like you draw a line drawing, and then the AI will come up with its own full color, various styled image, sort of improvising on your sketch. And what's interesting in playing with these tools, I mean, we're not the only ones doing this sort of thing. I'm just happen to know the tools my own team has built, right? But what's interesting there is the end user is contributing something creatively. They're giving some creative spark in a way that the generative AI is not currently able to do, but the generative AI is then fleshing it out so quickly and complexly in a way that would take people a long time, right? So I think
Mhm.
a risk of natural language interfaces using current LLM technology is everything regresses to the mean, because that's kind of what the LLMs do. Like they take what you say and they sort of complete it in line of like the some complex weighted average of all their
Right.
training data, and it is quick and
A-
it's quick and efficient to
and it
do
sounds
that.
good quickly, and the people that don't know any better are happy because they
Well,
just got something quick for nothing, right?
I mean,
They didn't
it
realize.
is good, right? So, like, if you play some notes on the keyboard, it will complete it in the spirit of Mozart or 12-bar blues or something. But what it
Right.
won't do is complete it in some different way that no one ever did before, right? So I think there's an interesting direction of technology development to sort of
Right.
tweak these technologies in a way that is oriented toward allowing human creativity to sort of interoperate with the limited creativity that the AI is able to provide. And what I see is that that's not the direction that big tech companies are bothering to take things in very
What's not the
often, because
direction?
Yeah.
What's not the direction? When you say that's not the direction, what specifically do you
trying
mean?
to milk creativity out of the user and having the AI sort of improvise
Right.
on that
Because what you want is
creativity.
basically a model that would do what you would do if you had the time, right? You want to train it on your stuff
I don't
so that
know I don't know that that's what
that's
I
what
always
I
want.
want.
That
That's
may
what
be
I
what
would
you
want.
want. I may
But I'm
want
just
something more.
saying,
I may want something
yeah.
more interesting than what I would do. Like in an art context, I don't want what I would do because I'm a bad artist. But
But
but I
there's
don't
stuff you
but
don't
I
you
don't.
don't want that you might be able to filter out. So at
Well, I
least you don't
don't.
have to hear that take. You see what I mean? Like there's a
I
lot of bad
mean,
takes that I feel like you could train it. I'm asking you, can you, as you generate, you were talking in your other show with Desdemona's Dream about how one of the ways that you're currently using it is to generate, like you're saying, for it to generate melodies to see if it comes up with something that you
well,
like.
yeah. So
Wouldn't it
in a
be good to have a way of filtering out the stuff that you already know you won't like?
sure, but that's not the most
Okay.
interesting thing to me. That I mean, that would be helpful to me. Having the AI in music, having the AI emulate what I would do, is not that interesting because I'm already here, and I mean having I could see there's an application to that. Like if that were my profession and there were
And
100
you had to
TV
put out an
shows.
album every year,
Well,
right? It
putting out
could
an
be
album every
brilliant.
year is fun. I mean that's a feature, not a bug. But if I
Well,
had
it's very
but if I
hard,
had a
actually.
but if I had 1,000 TV shows that want me to compose soundtracks for them, I just don't have time for it, right? And so yeah, if an AI could make a Ben-like composition for 1,000 TV shows, that's interesting. But what's personally
That's
more
really
interesting,
interesting, right? If you can't afford the person, maybe you can rent out their AI to do your
right?
soundtrack. That's fucking cool.
What's personally more interesting to me is having the AI make up something that is inspired by what I played, that is not like what I would play, but also is not like exactly what other people have played before either. I mean that's more interesting to me. And I mean, as one trivial example, we're trying to use generative AI to design a logo for our band, right? And what you get from Dali, Mid Journey, blah blah blah, is really cliche. Like it comes out of Logos Are Us, right? Because it's seen a lot of rock band logos before, and it is highly competent. It will draw a better logo than I could draw in a trackable period of time because I'm either very
Do
slow
you
or very
do you
bad at
iterate on
drawing.
it? Do you refine the prompt and iterate on
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
or are you trying to come up with one big prompt that
No.
initially then lands the right thing?
Oh, you have to work on it.
definitely iterate on it, and probably what happens is we'll iterate on it enough, and then get something that we have to tweak in
Mhm.
Photoshop afterwards somehow. So you can. I'm pretty good at fighting with these models to get something interesting out of them by post editing and saying, "Oh, can you vary on this?" and so forth. But that's because I'm a pretty sophisticated power user, right? But you can see there's a tendency to revert to the mean here, which I don't like. I don't like too much as a somewhat weird end user, which is
trying to be original. You're trying to be
it's
unique.
it's a different point than these things not being AGIs. Like, this is just thinking about what's the downside of natural language interfacing? It makes things super easy. On the other hand, the NLP tools that we have now try to turn everything into a cliche, which is an interesting aspect to have.
But
right?
I want to build on this, right? So I hear everything you're saying about the current state of let's say diffusion and transformer models for creating truly creative things. And we're, I think, baby steps there, right? And we're in early stages. Mm-hmm. However, consider the fact that most of the things that people do in business are extremely cliched. Most of the user interfaces everyone uses in software, extremely cliched. In fact, by design, there are design languages, there's UX, UI guidance. It's like, you don't put buttons in different places and make it a game to hit them. They lay out a particular
everybody
way.
does it anyway. It's just making it easier.
Totally, what I'm saying is, right. What I'm saying is, and actually one of the little quips that I had on Twitter back in the day when people were still complaining about hallucination is, yes, these are stochastic parrots and they're bullshit generators, but 90% of human communications, especially in the business world, is bullshit. So actually it turns out, and I don't mean that just to be like a George Carlin spicy kind of take. I mean, literally, a lot of actual, because humans' interfaces to each other is natural language. I don't speak to you in XML or REST. I speak to you in English, and it's imprecise and it's crappy, and it takes us 20 minutes going back and forth to align on the thought, right? Yeah. But guess what? That's what 99% of what humans spend their days doing is.
Yeah, I mean, I think saying that it's bullshit is only partly right. Like, some of it's bullshit, but some of it that's actually not bullshit is still very templated, right? I mean, there are things that are useful and pointful and honest communications that they just fit into a certain routine, because that's how modern society is organized.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And I want to be clear about something. If you look at the global and where this, and I want to make sure to connect these dots back to the topic of what is the pressing thing for us, right? What is like in this moment, why do we, as technologists who are humanists and concerned about the human condition, why do we need to think about this? Because I think that the current state of transformers and what diffusion models or whatever else comes down the pike here with the state space models, whatever it is next year, right? All of these things are going to be actually, I think they're refinable and they're good enough to take down a tremendous amount of white collar work and white collar economic activity.
Sure.
And you could argue that, hey, if I have a technology that can make one of my workers spend 80% of their time is spent doing something, I can have this technology to reduce that to like 0, right? Well, some people might say, well, I'll keep the worker and fill that 80% time with something else interesting. Most are going to say, well, for now, I'm going to cut those workers. I'm going to consolidate 5 people into one job and equip them with a bunch of cloud AI bits. And then we'll figure out what we need from there and hire people back in. But I'm certainly not going to go and pay somebody to sit at a desk and work 1 day or 1 hour out of 5, right?
Yeah,
so
sure.
The transformation for, and the importance about, I know it's weird to call the white collar work part of this, but that is where the middle class and upper middle class jobs primarily are. And it's certainly what is given as an aspirational sort of carrot to the lower classes of why you take on college debt when you put your kid into college so they can get one of these nice, cushy white collar office jobs. And it turns out, no, that's actually going to be replaced by an LLM. So the whole structure of modern economic society is going to get quite turned around here.
Yeah, sure.
Right. And that is a huge, huge political risk and a huge destabilizing thing for society. So we should be thinking about, and by the way, because of that, so let's just connect the dots here and take the chess move. Now, what is the N+1 move? The N+1 move then is politicians are realizing there's no technical solution to this. Okay, there's no technical solution to this, and they cannot mandate that everyone in the private sector maintain 80% overhead in their office and clerical, administrative, and IT work. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen? What do you think is really going to happen in the world? What's going to happen is that regulations will come down to gatekeep these technologies, and everyone's going to get a piece of the pie. Everyone, the tech companies are going to get a piece of the pie. The politicians will get a piece of the pie for regulating and keeping it in this kind of walled ivory tower where the dollars flow, the productivity flows from, and so on and so forth. And that is where it will go.
Nice.
I don't think that will happen, actually. But I mean, I agree.
It's a nice idea. It's what should happen. It's what could happen.
No, it is not what should happen.
I totally don't think
it is what will happen.
I totally don't think it's what should happen, and I totally don't think it's what will happen. But I do think people will try to make it happen. But I think that AI is very slippery to define and rapidly changing, and the political establishment is just too stupid. Not that the people are stupid. The way the whole political establishment works is not able to do what you said.
So that's your argument for why?
Maybe I misunderstood what you were saying.
I think that in mainland,
I didn't think
mainland China,
depended on the political establishment. Go ahead.
All right,
Ben.
you gotta give up. All right, yeah.
No.
My question is, I want to understand. Are you saying that politicians are too stupid to put such a system into place, and so it won't happen that way?
That's not exactly what I said. I don't think the politicians are stupid. I think the Western political system as an institution, as a collective intelligence, is too stupid and too slow to adapt. I think the mainland Chinese government can do what you said, because they have a different way of doing things. They're not rule of law based. In a way, they can adapt more flexibly, and of course, they have dictatorial control. They can remove or add CEOs of companies. So I think that's what could happen in mainland China. I don't where I spend a lot of time, but I don't think that can happen in the West, because I think AI is too slippery and rapidly changing to usefully regulate. It's too hard to say where AGI leaves off, narrow AI begins, and where software leaves off and AI begins. So I don't think that can work. So I mean, what I think has to happen.
Maybe I'm not well. So Ben, I want to be really clear about this.
Sure.
Because what you're arguing against is not what I'm arguing for. Like in the sense of like I'm not saying that the Senate's going to pass a law saying we must keep all this AI technology back here, and everyone from Wall Street to the West Coast tech companies will then take a vig out of this productivity, and then the middle class gets screwed. I don't think there's the Senate, screw the Middle Class Act of 2024 that's in the offing, right?
Sure.
I think the evolution of the interaction between tech and the political system in the West, and let's just talk about America because that's what I know. Okay. I think it will naturally lead to this kind of a equilibrium state where there is a de facto system of what do you call it? A system of a tribute system, so to speak, that is basically makes it untenable and legally unattractive and dangerous for anyone who is not affiliated with a large corporate entity to try to develop AI and next-gen deep learning technologies or whatever neurocognitive technologies outside of the enclave of academia, academic research institutes, national labs, and big tech research facilities.
I don't think that will happen.
Bad.
But I do not think that will happen. And of course, that will be bad for me if it happens, since I'm trying to develop.
Well, do you want me to tell you how it's going to go down?
Machines outside of any of these settings. Right. I mean, I'm also a dual citizen of U.S. and Brazil, and if the U.S. goes that way, I can take my project somewhere else. But
it will put its thumb. It'll put its thumb on all the other burn signatories. It will put its thumb on all the other burn signatories. Look at the DMCA. Well, look at things like what
that's
Section 230
did. That's why we don't want
did.
Regulation like that. Right? That's
we
bad.
don't want to like what? Yes, I know. I mean, I don't want it either.
So,
I'm not saying this because I want it. I'm just telling you how I think it will evolve.
I would be curious to hear a more detailed narrative of how you think this will
go down, like this. How this might occur.
Go down. Yeah.
It's actually pretty simple. All of the foundation models right now essentially are reflections or holograms of their training data, right? the model itself in terms of like the TensorFlow or PyTorch code, whatever. It doesn't really matter if you don't have data behind it, and then you need the resources, the hardware that is interconnected, with pretty expensive interconnects and pretty expensive GPUs. Okay, we all know that's true. So in that training data, most of the big models, and we don't even know how things like GPT-4 are trained. That's not public knowledge. What data is actually inside Llama, we don't really know. But what we do know is that a lot of those web scrapes and crawls are filled with things that are potentially problematic if you're a corporate user and you're going to get, if there's like some, child whatever material in there, like that's no bueno. If you're potentially putting a target on your back for having copyright infringement material and someone gets on you. So there is a legal gray zone around using models that are trained on these kinds of data. Now, people are litigating this right now, but if we don't do something to keep this space, to create, well, I'll just say that one way this could go is that, and you're already sort of seeing this happen, big tech makes one-off agreements with the people who are big holders of copyright. That's the movie studios, the recording studios, the trade, whatever things. They have a détente. They negotiate. It's like in the movies when the the mafia, the five families get together and they carve up the cake. It's the same thing. Microsoft agrees.
But that's not where the text
like the
data
cable
is
company.
coming from. I mean,
that's not where the what?
The textual data, the textual data in the common crawl is not primarily from large corporate sources. I mean,
no, I understand that, but the lawsuits that me as a corporate user of LLM technologies, am I going to use Ben's excellent cognitive technology, or am I going to use the Microsoft one that already has, with a lot of exemptions and maybe even some liability if I ever get sued? I'm going to use that one because Ben certainly can't rep me for $10 million of legal copyright violation sort of insurance, right? So this is the kind of thing that I'm saying that they actually want to have in the open. They want there to be a lot of legal gray zone. And then the only clean gardens where you can actually do some real work and corporate use and business use is going to be within the walls of these consortia, which are a licensing plus compute infrastructure. And that then gives them a lot of space to go.
Why wouldn't OpenCog be a clean garden? It's a perfectly clean garden. It hasn't been trained on infringing stuff.
But Lisa, the point he's making is, with current AI technology, unless there's some breakthrough that reduces the reliance on huge amounts of data, with current AI technology, you need these tremendous amounts of data to train your system, whether the back end is an LLM or some other newfangled thing. I mean, if we're talking about AI systems at all, like current large language models or diffusion models for images or whatever it is, music gen for music, these are relying on pretty large volumes of data, which often are
that have already infringed. Yes.
Yeah, and his point is,
you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, and if you can't take the training data out, then they'll just pay them off. I understand the concept, right?
Well,
that's what you're saying.
I mean, it's
more about FUD. It's more about the FUD.
Yeah,
the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right?
What
around
he's saying
is that
large companies will make enough one-off licensing deals with large holders of copyright, so they will then make enterprise users more comfortable with big corporate AI than with independent AI. And if the enterprise users are putting all of that usage and into the corporate AI, then that will cause the corporate AI to race ahead of open alternatives.
Isn't I think the same problem we always have with open source fighting corporate?
It's different. It's different.
How is it different?
Because of the role of the data, not just the code is different. I mean, having open code isn't enough anymore is the thing. If you have open code and you don't have open data and you don't have affordable access to compute to train models on the code, then the open code mostly serves to turn, the students of the world into a recruiting farm for big tech, basically. But there's just a lot of other ways this dynamic could go down. So I mean, an open
Good.
source,
Talk about that.
an open source alternative project like, say, OpenCog, my own project. I mean, we've had a close relationship with Cisco in the past, to make one example. So there are plenty of large companies around which are not currently leading in the LLM or generative AI field, but they would like to do something. And there are plenty of opportunities for open source projects to ally in different ways with large companies that have various business models associated with provision of AI in different ways. So I mean, just like open source has evolved in a quite complex way in terms of its interaction with various large businesses, like IBM and Red Hat as one example, which has gone weird recently, obviously. But I mean, I think there are different ways for open AI projects to ally with different corporate players so as to obtain the kind of legal cover that you're talking about. So it's not as simple as like Microsoft, Google, Apple, and Facebook versus open communities with no corporate affiliation and more money. I think the chess game can be a lot more complicated than that, and it may well wind up with some more open AI approaches that do have the sort of coverage that enterprise customers want. But this of course gets deep into the weeds.
Well, I don't think it has to go deep in the weeds, because I think ultimately, like as a physicist, I try to reduce complexity to the irreducible fundamental dynamics of a space. Okay. And a business, no matter how big it is, no matter how much it has things that it's doing in partnerships and whatnot with this open source thing and that not open AI, but open small community AI thing or whatever it is, no business will sustainably engage in partnership with anyone that fundamentally goes against their business model and how they actually pay their people and put food on the table. Full stop. And in the space of AI, in the space of LLMs, even just again, meeting the need of the next phase one, let's say the next of enterprise adoption of these kinds of technologies, what they need, many different companies can suffice, but there's going to be enough internal things they got to do to make that work that they're just going to pick one or two major folks they're going to work with and use those tools. They may not want to do a sole vendor, like we're only a Microsoft shop or we're only a Google shop, but they're going to not pick 20, right? They might have experiments here and there, but really, 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 when you're talking to CIOs and CTOs with $10 billion budgets, they're not going to split their bets that many different ways. They're going to be a little bit like 5-10% for research, and the rest of it they're going to commit to big vendors who basically take a lot of pain and questions off the table for them. And Lisa, you asked a question earlier, which is you sort of threw it out in the middle of our banter, but it was a very important one. And I want to make sure everyone here understands, because I think people who are listening to this live stream or to this podcast, you're in the innovator sort of forward-leaning kind of group of people, right? But the way that technology is purchased, the way that technology is vended and acquired in the world at scale, it has nothing to do with the actual substance of the technology itself, or has very little to do with it. So when you, Lisa, said, "What? Why couldn't they use OpenCog?" Ben, they could train on clean data and all this stuff. Well, that's great, but do you know how many people are going to spend time looking at all of the Bens and Ben-like small sort of teams or whatever? Or how many are just going to say, well, you know what, I'm going to buy the thing that everyone else is buying, so I don't get fired when I go sideways.
They don't actually care if it's clean. They just don't want to get sued.
This is the thing. Well, they care about not getting sued, and there's safety in numbers, and there's a feedback effect. There's a virtuous cycle around that, or vicious cycle, however you want to look at it, where if you are a big AI vendor, let's say you're Microsoft, who happens to be a partner of my company, by the way. I mean, there's nothing wrong with Microsoft in particular. I'm just talking about the dynamics of big tech, right? If Microsoft has 10,000 corporate customers, all using a particular technology. They can certainly say, we will indemnify you from certain kinds of things if you use our tech, because we know that the vast majority of things you want to train on, we already have licensing agreements with those people. We're done, right? We're part of that licensing. We call it consortium, you call it cartel, depending on how pejorative you want to be. And then if something does go down, guess how many senators and congressmen I can call up to say we need to put an executive order out to say, hold on a second, let's actually create a moratorium on lawsuits and let the legislators go and discuss this and put some legislation in place, because this is an unexplored area of technology, right? And guess how many of those legislators you're going to go and treat to really nice steak dinners, right? And so on and so forth. And so the way that, I mean, Ben, I agree with you that the political system in the West is not as coherently run as China. But I think the net result is that it serves the people who have power and money and who are entrenched in the markets today. And it will do so.
Do you think that would be kind of outrageous if they put a moratorium on lawsuits?
No, not a moratorium on lawsuits. No, not necessarily a moratorium. It wouldn't quite be like that.
Good. Okay, but, good, because that would be outrageous.
No, but what they could absolutely do, well, but you see where it's at right now. There are lawsuits going on, right? And they can have more and more lawsuits, and they can say, you know what? These judges are going to kick it up to Supreme Court, and Supreme Court might just say, this is actually something that needs to be legislated. And in fact, the Copyright Office in the United States has said, we're taking a wait and see to see what happens in the market, right? So this is absolutely an area where, I mean, look, if you believe anything in the world, you have to believe that money plays into politics everywhere, in China, in Brazil, and in the United States, right? So all of these people who have tens of thousands of enterprise customers, you don't think they're going to bring some dollars to bear on that problem, make sure the legislation falls their way? Look at what happened to DMCA. Look what happened to Napster. Look what happened to BitTorrent, right? This is absolutely the case that disruptive technology that is easy for individuals to use and adopt will absolutely have regulation run all through it to the point where it's basically,
but there's this whole other solution that is sometimes talked about that nobody likes to talk about in terms of trying to get the infringing data out of the models. And when I cornered a copyright attorney from the Copyright Office, they told me that that was actually what they're looking at most, is that making people build their systems in such a way that the training data could be removed if necessary. And if they don't want to do it that way, if they've got a model where it can't be removed, well, then they would have to start over or something. And that would hopefully be encouragement to build it the right way. Now, what do you two think of that?
I mean, you can't do that right at this exact moment. The technologies that are making the most effective models do not support that. To train a model that way,
I didn't think so.
It would greatly increase the cost of model training at the present time. So I mean,
so you can't go back. So that's why they're talking about paying them off, because they couldn't fix it.
I mean, it's not that you can't. It's not that you can't do that. You can't do that in real time in an effective way. I mean, of course, new model versions are being trained all the time.
Year.
And but I mean, you're training a new model with a greater frequency than a year anyway. So I mean, you can certainly remove certain data from the next dot version of your model when you train it. But I mean, this gets very particular though. Like in music, for example, the country of Japan, the government has just said it's okay to train AI models on Japanese music. We don't consider that a copyright violation. So you can download all the J-pop and J-rock you want and train models on that, and you can't be.
What about American music sold in Japan?
That I do not know about, actually.
So there's two pieces to this. Number one, Lisa, on the training thing, it's not just about backing out one piece of data. To Ben's point, if 100,000 different artists and musicians want to start backing out data, what do you do? And by the way, if I'm an enterprise customer of yours and you're like, let's say one of the big AI vendors, and every single day, every single hour, there's thousands of things that start coming out of the model, how in the world do I have any kind of reproducible application I build on your thing, right? So it's not just the cost of even doing the technical thing of backing all the stuff out. It's then completely destroying the viability of using this as a piece of computational infrastructure for business application development, right? Which is how everyone wants to make their money on this stuff. And so a better way is to actually build on public data or data we know is almost incontrovertibly okay for training. And then add to that data where the artists, the creators, the human authors have explicitly given permission for training, either into a model for perpetual free use or with some kind of remuneration, and then build this up in a compositional way up. And that's way more expensive, way more deliberate and slower than just lumping it all in and just cooking it. But that is probably the only viable path forward. And those who've heard my talks about building this this is Anaconda sort of regenerative and viral license for training data. This is exactly the concept, is to put the power back in the hands of human authors to explicitly say what they want to do with their data. And that will then encourage, hopefully, the development of models that are actually built with this intentional treatment of the provenance of data.
I was just going to ask you literally about the provenance of data and how we could really, what system we would need some kind of way of verifying the provenance.
We don't have it. We're right now an internet before TCP/IP. So we got to invent that thing. And if we do, then we unleash and we essentially we make it that we rationalize the ability for every single person who's trying to do Web3, AI kinds of things, everyone who wants to do peer-to-peer kinds of things, everyone who wants a computational GPU cloud marketplace and AI predictive model marketplaces, all that finally becomes possible because then we have a definition of rights that is outside of any particular corporate entity or any particular governmental entity. And we as a technical community in the world can start building this with a view towards expiration to commons. And so we don't end up like Sonny Bono extensions of copyright. And we end up with not having jurisdiction shopping, which is why, Ben, I asked you the question about, well, if Taylor Swift's song, and she's not Japanese last time I checked, but a Taylor Swift song sold in Japan, if I can train an LLM over in Japan and ship it on a USB stick back to LA, well, now we've just blown a hole in American copyright law, right? So this is why it has to be a global movement of technologists who understand the economic implications of doing this kind of like foundational work. And that's my little high horse. So thank you for listening.
That's a really important question, though. Is the Japanese release of Taylor Swift count in that?
I suspect no, it does not. But I would have to double check that. But
yeah, but Ben, I really want to know what you're thinking here. You have these great looks on your face. Tell me what you're thinking.
Oh no, I mean, I think what Peter said about curating training data that's clean to use is clearly a good direction to go in. And I mean, I think there's an obvious but worth highlighting synergy there with work toward AGI, because I mean the nature of general intelligence is that it can generalize further beyond the data that it's fed. So it's not that an AGI won't benefit from more and more data, but the degree to which adding more similar data increases the intelligence of an AGI system will be less and less, right? Like, I mean, if you took a great human musician and showed them one 12-bar blues song, they might just get it, right? And they would learn 12-bar blues from that. No, but to train music gen on 12-bar blues, the way that works, it needed quite a lot of examples to get the gist of what it is, because of the way it functions, right? So I think as you progress towards systems that can make leaps of generalization beyond their data, you're making systems for which having the whole common crawl is less important, right? Like for a smart enough system, having everything in Wikipedia and archive.org would go quite a long way, right?
Exactly.
There's quite a lot of
AGI,
there's quite a lot of knowledge in there. So this, getting back
you would
to
need some copyrighted data, wouldn't they?
I don't think so. No, I mean, I think that if you look in Wikipedia, and if you look at all the papers on Archive, and if you look at all textbooks which are open, you probably got quite a lot quite a lot there, actually. So I don't.
That's exactly right.
I think the thing is the way that.
So the stories would be there, the culture would be there.
I mean, Gutenberg corpus. There's a lot of great novels in it, right? I mean, there's way more open text. There's even the free music archive, let alone all the Japanese music. I mean, there's way more open stuff out there than any of us has ever looked at in our lifetime as individuals, right? The thing is that getting back to the issue of capture of the AI space by big tech companies, I mean, big tech companies have less motivation to develop technology that doesn't need humongous data than I do, because they have the humongous data. And if you're in the position of, well, like I'm one of 10 entities on the planet that has an easy way to use all this data and train models and all this data, if that's the position that you're in, I mean, your motivation to figure out how to leverage your unique advantage is strong, and your motivation to figure out technologies that don't leverage your unique advantages is weaker, right? So
the way I put it is that most car companies not incented to invent more efficient bicycles, right? And so this is and in this case, I mean, Ben, you touched on something very important, which is that if we create these clean training corpora, then it actually creates all the people in the world, and there are many who think like those of us on this call here, who want to see AI succeed within the confines of, not confines, but with the criteria, the boundary conditions of respecting copyrights or respecting creator and authorship rights and having clean governance of the training data and so on and so forth. If you create the corpus and then people can start with that, and maybe the model sucks, maybe it's not even GPT 3.0, right? But then you actually can have a place where people say, I'm going to develop new kinds of techniques that go as far as I can with this training data set. And I can measure the delta between this and GPT 3.5 and between this and GPT 4. And maybe in certain countries, we get certain kinds of provisions where for nonprofit and research use, it's okay to use, it's considered fair use. And then we look at how much we need to layer in on top of this. So you actually have a starting point that you could then, it'd be a nucleation site for the research around more efficient and data provenance preserving training techniques in a way that, to Ben's point, if your business model is, if your moat, in fact, your business defense is that I've hoovered everything up and I've got the legal guns and the resources to go and fight off or negotiate, with copyright holders, then you're not incented to solve this problem at this small scale. And to your point about AGI, Ben, this is then the other really, really important thing. You're absolutely right that if I've got 25,000 copies in the training data set of something, the 25,000th and first copy doesn't really add that much value. Now, if we go and we start from the beginning with asking what is salient, what gives us the most delta? What is the information is the difference that makes a difference? What's the stuff that makes a difference? The next, delta for us on this data set, you can actually create markets for data that move the model forward and improve its predictive capacity in certain niche ways or in certain general ways. And you're now actually creating once you have provenance in there, you have now some basic building blocks to actually build a data marketplace, a data stream, like sensor data stream marketplace, and a predictive model marketplace, because you as a consumer of these models can actually see where it comes from. And you as a maker of models have you have a marketplace where you can get paid for your work. And these data streams, garbage in, garbage out on any kind of machine learning, right? So I've got raw data streams and sensors I can put all over the place, and it's valuable because it informs these models. Now we actually have a global network of data streams, data providers, data curators, and model makers and predictive engines, right? That is then what builds up to that.
I wanted to bring something up that one of our viewers said that actually ties into the next point that I've been thinking about for a while. William J. McCartan says, global governance sounds great, but we can't even agree that everyone should have enough to eat. So I don't think global governance has any legs as of today, but the tech is moving faster than the rules can be. And that leads me into UBI, which is the obvious solution to some of these employment issues that we're talking about. If people's jobs go away, we need some kind of basic income for people. And how do you see that? We can't even agree. Really, we should have UBI already, right? And the idea that we have to wait until literally white collar jobs, everyone's white collar job is taken away, and now people realize, oh, we need government assistance. So how do you see that fitting into these discussions that are going on in the government, in the private sector?
I think governance maybe is the wrong term to apply to what I'm talking about, because I think global protocols, technology has created plenty of those. Countries that are literally shooting missiles at each other both use Ethernet and TCP/IP and HTTPS. Right? They may have different root certificates for their PKI, but guess what? They're all using RSA, or they're using some variant of some elliptic cryptography, right? Because we all agree on math for the most part. So I think when it comes to technology, the whole point is to quote, the famous quote, "Code is law." And so we're in the business of building code. Let's think about what laws will essentially be de facto minted by this code. Okay. And my point is, if we abdicate on this topic of data provenance and authorship and clear attribution of human authorship, if we whiff on that as a global technical community, then we allow, essentially, we're not using TCP/IP anymore. Everyone's running Novell NetWare, right? And you're definitely not getting Linux, because you're not going to get the spec to write the drivers for NetWare unless you pay 20 grand to some big company. So this is why I think absolutely global protocols have been they're the foundation of modernity, right? But global governance, yes, it's very hard. Now, global governance is hard, and this ties into your UBI question, because before, and this is, maybe I'll go on the record for saying this, before we can have universal basic income, we have to replace the current systems of meaning and social status. So you need to actually have a system for universal basic meaning and validation, social validation, before you can give people universal basic income. And the reason is because modern Western countries, most people tie personal value and social value validation to their income. So it's not that you're taking money away from them. It's not that you're you're going to starve them. It's not that you're not going to give them government basic provisions. It's that they lose their self-worth infrastructure. And you cannot ignore that social problem as we're talking about how to refactor the economic system.
So the idea is that, I'm not sure I understand what you're saying needs to happen. It's not right that people are that you assign value to people based on their income. And I think that's one of the things that it's not right, meaning, of course, there's valuable people that make less money. That's what I mean. And then I think this is sort of a wake-up call for the white-collar class in a lot of ways, right? Because it's usually always been the blue-collar jobs getting replaced by machines. And so now, and they have seen the light, let me tell you, that people seem more, they understand now why government assistance wouldn't necessarily mean that you were a freeloader or whatever. People seem to be understanding that now that they're looking at it possibly in their future. So what are you exactly saying needs to happen as far as society?
Validation of themselves. Yeah, people's validation of themselves. Not just I'm not saying someone who makes less money than me is worth less than me. That's not what I said.
No, I wasn't saying you were. You were saying that society tends to assign.
Society has essentially, in general, for most people, society has normalized this idea that your standing and rank in society is tied to your level of income. And this is true in general, in whatever country you go to. It is sort of part of the structure of the modern world that we live in market economies. And even if we didn't live in market economies, even if we lived in a tribe on an island somewhere, there's still social status, right? So the question isn't how do we rewire people's brains to no longer be monkeys that seek status, but rather, what is an infrastructure for meaning generation? What are arrangements of people's lives that allow them to find meaning in other things that are not so tied to their income, and also that don't have them have a lot of fear about what might happen to them or their loved ones if they don't have income? Because that's why income is so important, right? And so,
so if everybody's suddenly on UBI, then everyone will be like, this is the normal thing.
It is literally a first world problem, and I can see that it's important to think about, first of all, because we all live in the U.S., and also if the U.S. is where so much of the AI technology comes from, then of course attitudes on AI in the US become particularly important because they impact development. I also, but when thinking about these social and economic impacts, I'm always coming back to Ethiopia, where we have an AI development office where I've spent a fair bit of time, and my son-in-law is Ethiopian. And that's even one of the better off countries in sub-Saharan Africa. So, I mean, when I think about what will happen as AI eliminates white-collar jobs and then gradually more blue-collar jobs as modern AI is integrated with factory robotics and back end to various stores and restaurants and so on. When I think about what will happen as AI obsoletes more and more human jobs in coming years, I do think in the West, some form of something universal basic income like is almost an inevitability. And then you have psychological and social issues, which I think will probably not be a big issue for young people, most of whom will be happy not to have to figure out how to support themselves.
Exactly. The
But
idea that they could
it will be an issue for middle-aged people who have come to associate their identity with their career and income. I think the issues in, for example, sub-Saharan
they'll get over
Africa
it.
may be much worse. If you look at what will happen there, I mean, they don't give a fuck about copyright there anyway. I mean, like in downtown August, you have a very cool Apple Apple store with a no bite out of the apple and a sort of variation on the logo. I mean, they I don't think they ever joined the WTO's copyright protection pacts anyway, right? But I mean, when white collar jobs go away there, then like what happens? I mean, of course, everyone who's educated will leave the country to try to find a job somewhere else, but there's not going to be that many white collar jobs somewhere else either. So there's no one to send home money to people in rural villages to pay their phone bill and get prescription medication. People can go back to subsistence farming, which will feed them. But I mean, it seems like, and we're not very good at sharing the bounty. So it seems like a recipe for massive cyber terrorism and global unrest when you look outside of the walls of the U.S. And in that sense, there may be more acute issues than these copyright issues and so on. Although I can see if the copyright issues, if all these data provenance issues affect which software systems big companies are willing to use and corporate utilization of software drives which software systems get developed, then the dynamics in the US or Western Europe have a privileged nature in that they're what's guiding the development of the AI systems, right? So I mean that is
they will define the standards and protocols.
Everybody's watching.
It'll be ASCII way before it's going to be UTF-8, and you can read shit in your own language, right? So, but here's the thing, though. I want to be very clear. When I talk about the psychological and social psychology and whatnot in the West, I mean specifically in the West because we have a fairly service-based, industrialized U.S. right kind of country, and again, like I said, in the U.S. it has been the middle class dream and the whatever 2 cars in the garage and the whatever 3,000 square foot house in the yard and a pool, that's been sold as the dream to the next step down of the economic ladder, and then the upper class is sold as the dream to the next step down, and it has been a series of ladders, and that is the meaning cascade. That is the narrative that holds. It's like the weak nuclear force. It's sort of what holds a country together in the West. And that's why when we talk about the AI disruption, if you look at, and I think you made a very good point about the youth, like youth are happy. Like many young people are just living with their parents because it's so freaking expensive to go and try to buy anything out there. And also they have a ton of college debt, which didn't help them get a better paying job. So they got hosed on that. And like a lot of stuff is hosing them. We're about to go and race between two 70-something-year-old dudes to see who's going to be like,
they're almost
the president.
Yeah, so
And
so
it's
if
like
they can sit,
the idea
if
of
they
a
can sit
40-year-old
home and
running.
play,
So the
they
point
can
is
sit
to
home and play
say,
video games, they'll be happy.
yeah. So they sit at home, but here's the thing, and someone in the comments made this point: if you can suffice someone's need for entertainment, if you take the food, clothing, shelter, heat, and military, let's say kinetic dangers away, then what are you going to do?
Everything.
Yeah, well, not everything, right? But you can actually, I agree with you, Ben. We can actually suffice and meet. There's more. Well, I think there's some number that, even a few years back, it crossed this threshold where there's more empty rental housing units in the U.S. than there are homeless people. Right? We throw away about 50% of the food that we produce and take to market. Right? Whether it's restaurant scraps, whether it's like deformed fruit at the grocery store, or whether it's kitchen scraps that we throw away in the trash. Fifth, we fully overproduce by a factor of 2 food, and yet children starve, right? So it's not that we don't
All that's
have
been happening
the
for
resources.
years, and nobody's done anything about it yet. I mean, that's what I mean. How do we change this? Actually, Grace,
we cannot change this.
Oh, Grace has a question. Grace has a question that will move this along perfectly. Grace.
In your talk, you mentioned the concept of radical reinvention. How can this mindset of constant innovation and experimentation be fostered at both the individual and societal levels? What are some key ingredients or practices that can encourage a culture of continuous reinvention?
Because that's what we need to do. We are reinventing.
Well, and everything. I would like to talk. I would like to talk to Ben's point about Ethiopia and a non-Westernized, non-advanced sort of first world country kind of thing, where there is subsistence farming, where there is a lot of economic challenges and hardship. And I would say that this is exactly the concept and the paradigm is this, right? That what the Western style, mass consumer based, driving of financial gains and on paper growth, that is due to a yin yang or a vicious cycle of manufacturing demand and creating demand and then creating products that fill that demand and get thrown away. So the opposite of that is to solve for needs. And until you meet certain baseline sorts of needs at small scale social and big scale social levels, then we really center on that. And you use market mechanisms. I think full on socialism style things don't really work because differences do appear. And even if when you say all of the kids, would be happy, younger people would be happy all to sort of be able to hang out and not worry about this. That's true until some wealthy heir comes along in a private jet and hoovers up all the cute girls in town. And now all of a sudden you care about having a Ferrari or having a private jet, right?
You can just 3D print more of them. That's okay.
Yeah. Well, and
you don't need those girls that want the private jet. It's
multimodal models are coming, right?
You'll find a better girl.
But the point, but you see what I'm saying is that naturally humans do have a competitive streak and do have like local differences, and validation comes from this, purpose comes from this. I don't think we can solve that problem anytime soon. But what you can do is change the scale of integration. And if everyone is thinking at global levels, here on this call, I don't know how many people are on this call, but like we're thinking about global scale problems. Many people think they either live within their house, their family, or the world. And we need to actually put more things in place to say, solve your issues locally. It is worth it and is purposeful. And in fact, it is yours to do, to think about solving in your local area, in your local community. And so when AI comes to add us, or maybe outside, right, in the poorer rural parts, where they have subsistence farming, the problem to solve there is how can we actually increase yield? How can we better predict natural disasters and whatnot, whatever it might be? How can we more efficiently run infrastructure? The needs, focus on local needs and applying technology to that. And then you don't worry about eliminating the white collar jobs because frankly, you're applying AI technologies, whether it is AI discovered CRISPR editing of certain things to eliminate certain kinds of diseases, or whether it's, whatever kinds of materials that you might need or want to build more efficient housing. These are the kinds of things that should be centered on, as opposed to figuring out how to create more amusement for bored out white collar people that don't have full employment anymore, right?
So let me. Here's a question that was circling in my mind before this this interview. So, which has to do with a little more nitty-gritty practical questions about the different software and data frameworks that we're all developing, right? So there's somewhat similar faced in some stuff you're doing and some stuff I'm doing, and that you're which of course intersect with each other. So you're looking at, okay, how do we pull together a body of data that is clean in terms of the sovereignty and the buy-in of everyone who produced the data to the use of that data to train models. And one then wants to energize developers to figure out how to get the most out of this data, even though the first things you build based on this data may not be as whizzy or as functional as things that big tech has built based on larger amounts of questionably sourced data. Now, I have an analogous problem in my own world in that I'm developing my own approach to AGI based on not just LLMs, but deep neural nets put together with logical reasoning, evolutionary learning, all the stuff I talked about in my recent podcast with Jim Rutt that you got partway through listening to, right? So this, I think, I could be wrong, I think has more promise for getting us to human level AGI than just patching more and more stuff on LLMs. But at the moment, these systems do not do anything as cool as what Chat GPT does from the standpoint of the average user. So in both of these cases, we have a situation where there's something that clearly, in some senses, maybe the long-term or medium-term right thing to do, and you want to pull in developers, open source developers, to collaborate on making this thing better and better so it can even overtake what big tech companies are doing. On the other hand, right now, it's not going to give as much immediate gratification to the average developer as just hacking on open AI stuff or Google stuff. So like if you look in the SciPy world, right? So you look at like scikit-learn, there's like scikit-learn LLM that lets you use LLM to do zero-shot text classification and stuff. It's cool. It only works with OpenAI right now. You gotta put in your OpenAI API keys. Now they could have made it work with Llama or Mixtral or all these other open models, but then that will surely come. But I mean, right now the easiest thing to do is connect to OpenAI, which is already hosted. You just put in your API key. It requires less work for the average scikit-learn user just to hack with open AI, right? So the question, which is a practical question I'm wrestling with in my own work on SingularityNet and OpenCog, right? The question is like, what's the right way to sort of seed open source communities with an incentive to work on this stuff that's sort of cleaner and more promising in the medium term, but doesn't give the same level of immediate gratification. I mean, of course, you've had a lot of success with open source communities in various forms through Anaconda and related projects.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I will say there's maybe two parts to the question. One which is very sort of tactical and prosaic, and one which is a little bit more strategic, right?
Okay.
So the tactical thing, I'll start with the tactical one maybe, and that is that at least in the way that open source used to be done when we had mailing lists, right? And before there were vanity metrics of GitHub stars and being able to raise money with GitHub stars on your project, and certainly before big corporate players came in and realized that open source projects were a great gateway drug to offer free APIs to their captive cloud services. Before all of that, in the before time, back when I was, back in my day, people that showed up in the open source world already had like the prior probability of them wanting to participate in the community was much higher. Now, people who show up in open source more often than not, again, prior probability is they're just a user who wants to get stuff done. Okay. Now, oftentimes in the past, the people who showed up to participate in the community also wanted to get stuff done, but then they ran into a problem. They stubbed their toe. They ran into something that didn't work, or they have a use case that didn't exist yet. And they
Took
show
just
up
a little too long.
took a little bit too long. And if you were an open and welcoming community, I mean, I could give, if we were turn the time turner back to 2005, I give you lots of advice on how to build a welcoming project that would then grow, virally or grow organically through, I guess we want to use the word viral then. We said organically growing your community. And there's a lot of those things that I could have said in 2005 that literally would not work today. Not only is because everyone's busy and there's way more stuff, attention overload for everyone, but also because the nature of open source and human ecologies has now been, basically it's like, we went from like quaint peasant agriculture to industrial farming from like Monsanto, right? And GPS guided tractors. And we're just in a different world now. If you have an open source project, you post on Hacker News, who cares, right? And back then, there were not so many projects, and it was hard to find other people who want to work on things in their spare time. And so you could build a community that way just by doing the basic things. Now, no longer the case. You actually, if you want to have a successful open source project, you have to be a marketer. You have to think about DevRel as a real thing, as a first-class concern. And in fact, you have to fight not just for incoming developers, but for users even, right? Everyone has to fight for users, and all of the contributors and developers are also your users. So that's the very tactical thing, which is you've got to be, there cannot be a, if I build it, they will come. It will not happen. You've got to think about, what is my go-to community? What is my go-to market? How do I get people to actually use the thing and then build easy on-ramps? One of the things we do in open source projects is we mark certain kinds of issues as being easy to fix. Because one thing that has happened, though, on the silver lining side of things, is that many people are finding that being part of an open source development community is a great way to learn and improve their skills as developers, which is a valuable career skill. So you do have people showing up for that. So if you tag things in your repo as easy, tractable things for people to go and fix and work on, that's a great way to get new people into the community. And then you have to take community development as a first-class concern, not just feature development. So that's the tactical part. The strategic part is very simply this. Anything in the world, any product, any service, to be successful, it has to be able to differentiate itself, and it has to be able to tell a story about why it exists and why people should use it and give it their attention, time, money, whatever it might be. Now, in the case of giving away free software or getting people to join an open source project, you as the creator of it, this is your baby, it's your blood, sweat, and tears, sweat equity, whatever. You may think you're doing everyone a great service by giving them access to this wonderful thing and not even charging for it. But to everyone else in the world, you are yet one more thing begging for their attention. So you have to make it really, really easy from a human factors perspective for them to understand why. Why do I give a rip? Why this project, not the other 50,000 other ones? And then if you can nail that value proposition, you have to then inspire them to become part of the community, the movement, the project, whatever it might be you're building. So I would say strategically, you have to be, in both cases, kind of the same thing, but on the strategy side of things, if you really want an open source AI project to be successful, and this is true for AI projects, but it's true for many others that I see in the Web3 space and DWeb space, a lot of times, the nerds who I love, and I am one, but we tend to really get wrapped around the how and even the what, and we very seldom really articulate the why in an inspiring, compelling way. And that is a missing ingredient, but it's a really, really freaking important. It's like the plate you serve the dish on. People can't eat the plate, but if the plate looks like it's a piece of cardboard, it's not very appetizing.
So
right?
I think in the context of the two things that I discussed in my query, my own OpenCog Hyperon AGI effort and your effort to get AI models trained on clean, ethically sourced data. I think actually both you and I have done a pretty good job of articulating the why in these particular cases. I mean, the messages could always be simplified, but we have both, while we are geeks, we have sort of started with the why on these things. So I think the strategy part in these particular cases is probably there, aligned with what you said. The tactical part remains hard because of the aspect you mentioned that nobody has any time, and if if you can give people one thing which aligns with a wonderful medium-term narrative, and you give them another thing where spending an hour on it will give them something of more value for what they're trying to do today, then there's a strong bias toward the thing that will give them more immediate benefit with that hour of time, right? And I guess, yeah, that going back to the point you mentioned about humans being status driven as well as money driven. I mean, we're both old enough probably to remember when people said open source could never work because everyone wanted to make money through proprietary stuff. That turned out not to be true. Partly it turned out not to be true because people turned out to be motivated by the status hierarchy of open source developers, right? Like
it was its own status.
Yeah, I mean that's its own. It's just sort of like in academia, right? Like I spent the first decade of my career in academia. Professors are not mostly driven by money. I mean, of course, everyone wants a merit pay increment, but mostly they're driven by prestige in their little academic subfield. And the open source development community often has been that way. Like having higher prestige among the community of that project is part of what drives you. So it seems like somehow this aspect of human psychology has got to be drawn on and tied in with the strategy that you mentioned.
Exactly. And I sometimes flippantly refer to academia as the prestige racket. And I've recently stopped doing that as much because I realized everything in life is a prestige racket, right? Well, the racket part, maybe not so much, but it's all driven. A lot of it is driven by prestige because
it's just
we
that it's only prestige racket because there's no money.
It's a racket.
Joke,
it's
right?
a racket because you're causing really, really smart people to do bullshit things just to earn bullshit prestige nickels, right? As opposed to actually, like, if you look at the torment that you put PhDs and postdocs through, to what end? And by what right? Like, it's sort of, oh, don't get me started on academia, but I feel like universities should be forced to pay back to PhDs in their employable hourly rate or annual rate for every PhD they mint that then doesn't get a job or doesn't get a whatever. Like you either have to disclose the long-term career prospects and expectation value of net earnings over the 10 years after graduation. You have to disclose that
that's not happening.
PhD time. And
it's
because
funny
it doesn't,
how that process
no one
goes.
talks about it. No one talks about it. That's why I call it a racket, right?
My wife and my oldest son just finished his PhD late last year. My wife finished, I think, in 2018. And yeah, each of them in the last year was like, what the fuck? Like, why am I doing all this garbage, which has no value or meaning? No one should ever do this again. But then I found, like, a few months after it was done, they're just like, yeah, okay, I've got the degree. Yeah, whatever. But it's interesting. It's interesting the way
that's supposed to be part of the hazing
I think if you did a thing,
right?
well,
you're supposed to go through
it's interesting the way that status hierarchy goes. And obviously we don't want to emulate.
You made it.
We don't want to emulate the time wasting bullshit aspect there. Yet somehow just offering people the opportunity to contribute to making the world a massively better place isn't quite enough to agglomerate a developer community. And if there's not maximal immediate gratification and there's not maximal money, then there is some community development aspect that has to make it psychologically satisfying to contribute to these things.
Well, and I think that these problems are made harder because we have broken markets, not because markets can't be a solution or that money is bad. I think markets are great, and I think money is a very useful tool because we have a scale of civilization which requires transacting with entities and at scales beyond what we can build interpersonal relationships with. We're not just trading fish with our neighboring village down the river anymore, right? And so tokenizing trust and novating that trust to entities, whether it's banks or whether it's companies or whether it's governments, there's a utility to that clearly has created a natural world that is, or a material modern human world that is at a scale that would not operate any other way. However, all of that being said, when we have broken markets and then we layer in a racket or a Ponzi scheme or something like this, where we exploit people's labor and their intelligence and their heart, really, the passions, That part is what I object to, and that's
But isn't
why.
that just business as usual currently?
No,
That's
no, it doesn't. Nope, doesn't have to be. In the business world, actually,
it
really,
doesn't
really,
have to be, but absolutely,
Mhm.
it does not have to be. But I do think
Yeah.
that it tends to be.
In zero-sum situations, yeah, there's certain aspects of business which, as someone who's been in the business world now for 20 years, like there's certain kinds of businesses where you're like, yeah, those people are they have a particular wiring in their heads, and there's other places in business where it's actually it's not zero sum, it's positive sum. It's like, hey, you got some stuff you can do better. I got some stuff that I do that's great, and if I buy your thing, it makes me do my thing better, and I'm going to pay you a fair price for it, and that's fine. Like, so it's really not. It doesn't have to be A skewering B. It's not always Shark Tank, everyone bidding against each other. It's certainly not whatever, The
Right.
Apprentice with Donald Trump. Like, it doesn't have to be zero sum. And this has actually been to your point about open source communities. There's actually a great, not great, but there is a deep connection to what you're talking about with academia, which is in both cases, people are using their intelligence and their intellectual capacities to create stuff that they're not actually being fairly compensated for. So
Sure.
although, yes, we have succeeded in the sense that open source, no one now doubts the ability of open source communities to create really great things and to create innovation that's durable. What is absolutely undeniably an issue is the sustainability of these communities, right? Because it turns out if you produce something that's a tremendous value and you don't have a way to charge for it, no one's going to be nice and cut you anything remotely approaching a market price check for the value you provide. You got to ask for the money if you want to get the money. And so that kind of thing is, there was a deeper point I was going to make earlier about the open source aspect, but I think there's something now around, if we want to get people aligned to building these kinds of things, the thing we have to give them is, it's not just the dollars, and it's not just the work is cool. It's got to actually be, well, back to my thing about the vision. Like, here's how this actually paves the path or lays the foundation for the thing that comes next. And when you have that, right? Oh, I know what it was. It was because here's the thing. You made this really interesting point. You said that the open source world now has its own kind of prestige, right? That if you're developing makes a cool tool lots of other people use, you're kind of celebrated. People buy you a beer when you go to the conferences, right? And I think there's something very deep there about being able to create a social
true for a while. Yeah.
Of course, it's been true for a while. But my point is that you have created, though, like around this, the idea of a code repository that we email patches back and forth, or we check into GitHub or GitLab or whatever. The idea that we'll have a mailing list, and that that there is a human ecology. It could be a digital online one, but we have a human ecology where prestige, where social validation and social ladder can exist. That itself is a thing being created. That's actually a very thing. So it's
we need to move that kind of structure to some of these other systems.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And where Lisa, you and I met at the Dweb camps and summits, things like that. Open source communities, people with all of the right ideas and heart, and just it's such a great and fun community, and it's just so great to be part of the archive sort of extended family, right? That cares about these things. I mean, Tim Berners-Lee shows up, all sorts of folks. And the thing is, though, what we suffer from in that community is shipping useful stuff that people use at scale, right? And I don't mean that. But
it's way better. I mean, the difference between the first Dweb camp, the second Dweb camp, and the last one that had all this running code everywhere is substantial.
We're making progress there. And it's when you have, and I guess my point around this was that, to your point about, can we create community of development or community of collaborators where we're doing such useful work that there are actually emergent values, and then we align prestige to those values. Because I'll tell you this, in an open source community, you name a product, name a tool, name a community, I don't care what language. If they're doing anything useful at all, right? The people who have prestige there are not the ones who are making the tool worse for everyone or making everyone's lives miserable. Prestige is aligned to the emergent values or explicit values of that development community in general, right? Maybe not
That's
always,
the people
maybe
that
not
file
perfectly.
bug reports and the people that fix bugs. That's who gets the prestige. You
Yeah,
know,
but if someone
they'll do
exactly
the
people
work.
who do
They
the
do the
work,
work.
right. It's very substance based. So that's the thing that I would say that happens, even though prestige ladders occur, and there is a cascade there of prestige and
Yeah.
social status in those communities. As long as they're lined up with the values of the community, and that those values help that community make the impact it wants to in the world, then guess what? You got an integral community. And you got integral values, and the social status ladder is a manifestation of those values. And what can you complain about? That's totally fine, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that already the social status thing, especially in the last 10 years, because of a whole generation coming of age in a horrible economy with no jobs and the whole college thing, you can go into debt, go to college, but you still don't get a job. And that has really lowered the whole taking things into account when somebody's in a less than optimal situation. I think it's gotten to be that everybody seems to be, especially like I said, the younger generations, there's a lot of less than optimal situations, and it doesn't really have the stigma that it used to have in a lot of ways, because for that reason, especially with the pandemic kind of pushed everything over. All the people that were on the edge, I had a lot of artist friends that relied on events for their income that was just stopped immediately. And our community really, stepped up and helped everybody, doing things like that. And, driving groceries around, getting people masks, right? Masks were a thing in the beginning. We had to drive around. We were making masks to cover the real masks, fabric masks to cover a real mask, and driving those around to the hospitals, So I think the kinds of things we have seen, and these were my open source people that were all also involved in these projects, is what I'm trying to say, right? It was a natural progression. So I think that it really is true that we need to just try to apply this to the different systems. And it's just when you hit capitalism, it's sort of like there's more of a conflict. And that's really what we're still at the mercy of capitalism to a certain extent, trying to
I mean, this is all interwoven with capitalism in a way you can't untangle. I mean, the computer hardware we're running this on is all a product of.
That's right. And I'm actually one of the ways that I differ from a lot of my anarchist friends is that I don't just want to end capitalism under any circumstances and figure it out later, right? I want to figure out how to fix it so you don't have this, what me and my stepfather call strip mine capitalism, where you're just trying to squeeze the last dollar out of everything at the expense of whoever, and not caring about your workforce and not caring about, those kinds of things. And if we set it up, and again, this is where I'm for regulation. If there was government regulation that just made them have to give health care, we'd have help. We should have a government health care anyway, and stuff like that, right?
Government regulation has not really fixed the U.S. healthcare system.
No, because it didn't happen. It's not required.
There's a great amount of regulation in U.S. healthcare system.
But the requirement to actually give your employees health care is not actually there, right? And they let them do that 30-hour thing. So it's only for full-time employees when they do make them do it. And it's different from state to state. And I'm not trying to get into the inner workings of all that.
It is very complicated, but it's certainly also not unregulated, which would be.
I didn't say it was unregulated. I just said that healthcare was not required. Those are two completely different things. So you could regulate it all, but if it's not required, if the people that are only making $20 an hour to begin with don't either have healthcare from the government or from their employer, right? Then the government has failed in a way. So I'm saying that if the government had a heart, if it cared about taking care of people, so we have to figure out the way we need some kind of leverage to make the politicians.
This comes back to what I was calling the collective unintelligence of U.S. government, right? Because I mean, we've all seen what Clinton and then Obama and so on went through trying to put some reasonable healthcare legislation in for the U.S. So it's not that there weren't smart people in Washington D.C. who understood.
Well, it's got to be more than one person is the thing, right?
Well, there's a lot of people. It's just the dynamic of one party versus another in various institutions in the
Right.
healthcare system. I mean,
Well, I think
all this
there's
doesn't let things didn't let things evolve into a more reasonable system like you have in much of the rest of the developed world. But I see those same I see those same dynamics
point.
there in AI regulation, which is why I'm not
That's
too
why.
optimistic about the
That's
government
why.
being
Forget
helpful
it.
in practice with regulation of AI. Although, yeah, in principle, like if we had a rational, democratic, sensible world government, of course, in principle, that rational, democratic world government could regulate the advance of AI in useful ways. It's not like no global regulation could make sense. I just totally don't see how current
It
governmental
didn't make any
institutions
sense.
globally or
well,
within the
so
US are up to the
if we want to
task,
talk about
right?
why politics doesn't work or why it actually works extremely well but doesn't serve people like us,
Yeah.
we could
Works
talk
for
about that
what,
as a
right?
topic. But I will say that
We all agree on
fundamentally,
it.
yeah, well, I actually think that the political system works exactly as it's supposed to, which is it keeps the people who lose elections from killing the people who won, and it keeps them they accept the loss. And the
Right.
people who have leverage and power are able to exercise their leverage and power.
To keep
And they
it.
put on a
Right.
show to keep everyone else kind of basically aligned. And that's
Right.
the goal of it. It is not there to actually create better policies. It is there to provide a platform for people with money and influence to deliver policies. And so that's why when you talk about Lisa, you're like, oh, if only had some leverage. You do have leverage. It's called money. Go make yourself $100 million and you'll have plenty of leverage in the political
Well,
system. Mitch McConnell's very cheap. He only
I've
costs like
already
$10 million.
crossed that off the list.
Right?
So without the money, without being a crazy billionaire that has to listen to me or I'll buy your company, right? Well, how do we or you have to do what I say when I go to Congress, because don't worry, I'll find a way to screw you if you don't like listen to what I'm saying, from your donors, whoever they are, I'll get to them.
Lisa, this goes
no,
back.
Wait, let me finish. I'm saying it's not just that is what I'm trying to say, right? It's not just if you have money, you get a say, and if you don't have money, you don't. Okay. How do we actually get people together to try to care about stuff when they've been so well conditioned to think that just what you said, politics doesn't matter unless you're rich? That's what I was trying to ask.
Well, but that,
And
so
my
there
answer,
is.
so my answer, sorry, Ben, go ahead.
No, Ben,
No,
I was
it's
asking
fine. It's
Ben.
fine.
No,
Oh,
I was
okay.
asking you.
Okay.
Sorry.
I mean, obviously the power of open networks of individuals gathered and clustered around open source software in the past has cut past the stupidity of local and global governments. And that, as Peter said, I'm in, TCP/IP protocol. It's used in Iran. It's used in North Korea. A Linux operating system is used in Russia and Ukraine, right? I mean, for better and worse. I mean, open source software with networks of users and developers and evangelists and all this. I mean, this has developed with a speed and in a direction that government wasn't able to and didn't choose to interfere with, and it then became a sort of fact of life that government just dealt with. And you haven't seen U.S. government saying, well, if you put a patch into the Linux kernel and the Linux kernel is used in Iran, you're going to go to jail, right? So I mean that these software networks are developed in a way that is sort of cut beyond the perversities of governments. And going back to where we started out in this conversation, the challenge with AI has been that it's not just about the code anymore. Like you can open source the AI code. If you don't have the data and the processing power, right, then you can't do too much with that code. So then you need not only open source developer networks, you need ethically sourced data, and you need ways to cobble together compute power that don't require you to be Amazon or Google, which goes back to SingularityNet, NuNet, Hypercycle, or Dfinity, let's say, to name a project that's not one of mine. It goes back to various projects aimed at cobbling together compute power to do things. So I mean, so there's, and then developing these various tools for dealing with data and processing along with open source code. This still requires communities of smart people to distract their attention from other things, which comes back to vision and narrative, and then status hierarchies and status ladders and so forth. So I mean, in the end, like, we know, we meaning not just those of us in this call, but a certain number of people, I think, understand technologically what you would need to do in terms of putting data and processing and code together to allow the same open dynamics we had behind Linux and the internet to be a major factor in the next phase of development of AI. Making it real comes down to pulling communities of people together, which then comes down to grabbing people's attention, which is, of course, why we're doing this podcast. But of course, a podcast like this also has the feature of preaching largely to the converted, right? And you need to go beyond that, and you need to reach out to people who, as Peter said, didn't come out of the open source world wanting to do good, but just like want to get some shit done. And then you need to sort of make these people see, well, the way to get more shit done during the next couple of years is to maybe put a little bit of attention into helping develop these platforms, even if they're not doing the whizziest possible thing today, right? So I mean, I think we've spiraled around what is pretty much the answer to your
well, I want to hear
question,
what Peter, Peter, what's your take on that?
I sort of forgot the question.
The question.
I forgot it too.
Besides money, it was interesting what you said though, so I wasn't going to be like, that's not what I asked. It's about, since we all know the standard, you can't do anything, and especially United States. I can only talk about United States politics because I'm pretty ignorant about most of the other countries. Except I know that the UK, at least you can vote somebody out with a vote of no confidence, and I wish we had something like that here. I tell you that much. But if you're not rich, so you can't just control American politics by being a rich person. How do we actually use the collective community, the stuff that Ben was talking about a minute ago? How do we use that to affect this system? We have to find we have to figure this out, to do it. We can do it now and then for short. Remember, Aaron beat SOPA. Like, we can do little things. We get these little wins, right? But then everything else just goes back to.
So I'll answer that question with a thought experiment that also answers, I think, the question asked in the chat.
Okay.
Right? Which is that, we are, the idea of software as intellectual property, as a thing that is property that could be traded, that could be licensed, sold, bought, is only as old as I am. And I'm a little older, but not that old. And it's 40-something years old. And then the digital computer, the electronic digital computer, is scarcely a few decades older than that. And even when this digital computer was out, pretty much the people who made money on them and the people who worked on them, there were some systems analysts who did the punch cards, but mostly it was electricians and electronic engineers, wrapping wires around stuff and soldering things. The emergence of let me just call it a white-collar knowledge professional around the configuration and the build of this thing called software and information systems, and whether you're configuring a Cisco router, whether you're writing a bunch of scripts in Python or whatever, this idea of someone who does work with software and databases and this stuff, it's actually kind of a flash in the pan from an overall industry perspective. Now, consider if, not today, not next year, but in 5 years' time, the AI technologies, let's just call it that, get good enough that it essentially commoditizes out and renders most of these software professionals obsolete. Your junior entry-level front-end dev, your basic Python scripter, your IT guy troubleshooting this and that and the other, it's all replaced by a suite of expert LLMs that someone licenses by the hour when they want to go and do a thing. And you have small collectives of 20, 25 people, no bigger than, let's say, a bustling dentist's office, that are able to then work in certain niche areas of industry. And there's thousands of niches in hundreds of industry verticals. And they can actually just not have programmers, not have IT staff. They want a configuration. The thing spits out a Kubernetes YAML file, whatever, right? What if our entire industry of programmers and dev nerds and all these people went away? At that point, what right do we have to insist that we should have an outsized role to play in dictating what happens in the political sphere or what happens in the future of humanity, right? Because on the one hand, and I say this sort of as a sort of devil's advocate, right? On the one hand, I can hear the passionate sort of like, why does a billionaire get to, like, you know, it's not right. You have to be a billionaire. And then if you are a billionaire, you can go and just buy off congressmen. And they do that. Yeah, that's what happens. And it's happened since the days of Carnegie and others, right? But that's not to throw shade on Andrew Carnegie.
Like you said, that's a feature of the system. That's not a bug.
That's a feature of the system, because power aggregation, it started before it was the divine right of kings. At some point with industrial capital, with industrialism and industrial capitalism, then it became just whoever aggregated the most utility.
The divine right of rich people. Yeah.
Well, the divine right of utils, because there are markets and people did buy cars and people did ride railroads. Okay, it was value. And the way the law and the economic structures are arranged, there is a little really incredibly important piece of mathematical DNA at the heart of capitalism, which I think is really important for anyone who's an anti-capitalist or a capitalist to understand. And that is the concept of an interest rate that compounds ad infinitum without bound until the thing it is extracting the exponentials from has withered, died, or blown up. Okay? And the fact that we use an exponential, not a sigmoid, the fact that it is not capped, that is the issue at the heart of these things. But that is an extremely deep and difficult thing to try to rewire society around. But generative economics and the kinds of things that we're able to do, as a technical society now in this little brief period of time, when we create a lot of exponential dynamics with computer technology and then software and then certain configurations of web servers, like we are able right now, we have very privileged time as a bunch of code nerds to have a massively outsized impact on society. We may not have it forever, but while we have that time now, we should really recognize where is the heart of the beast? Who is really our adversary? What is really the thing that makes all that we love bad? What is the thing that creates so much, so much of the bad dynamics in the world? Can we propose, and why does it exist? Because if it was all bad, people wouldn't use it. It's clearly useful to some extent. So that's why to your anarchist friends who are anti-capitalist, I would say, hold on a second. It's clearly doing something very valuable for people. And if you don't understand that, you're not going to replace it with something better. You could burn it down, but you're certainly not going to offer a better version of it, right? And that'll be my little stump speech.
Yeah. I don't know if they want a better version of it, but the idea is just you could no, I mean, that's not what the anarchists are after, but I'm saying that the point of, I see the good things in capitalism too. I love the making something and selling it part, the making something and giving it to somebody or selling it. I like that part of it, which has already, I didn't know, my anarchist friends helped me understand that was a long way before capitalism.
It's just capitalism
just sucked that up.
A very different thing.
And, so, I mean, but going back to the question posed in the chat,
yeah. Oh, as far as what would the effect be? The question, by the way, so everyone knows, is what would happen if AI was making everything, all the goods and services?
So capitalism obviously has served super valuable role and also caused a lot of problems. And you could say the same of agriculture and civilization and the invention of language, for that matter. Many big things have emerged and have had many great aspects.
Yeah, okay. Everything has a bad side too.
But nevertheless, though, once AIs and robots can manufacture everything better than people, the era of human-driven capitalism is pretty much done. So, all this discussion is relevant to the transitional period between here and having superhuman AGI. They can do everything, which is very important because we're living through that transitional period. But if you look at the question of what happens if all goods are manufactured not by humans but by AIs and robots, then obviously it all depends on the motivational system and emotional and cognitive makeup of these AIs and robots, right? I mean, so, and there we're into a topic that's familiar to me anyway. I mean, if the AI running everything is well disposed toward humans, you have some species of utopia. If the AI that's created doesn't give a crap about humans, then the consequences is obvious. But I think the more interesting, in-depth question to focus on is about the transitional period, right? So as AI can do more and more of the things that humans can do, I mean, we can see that unfolding around us right now. And then there's certainly a plausibility to the idea that if the transitional period is more humane and compassionate, then perhaps that end state when the AI can do everything is more humane and compassionate, right? But we're out of time. But I think we've not been compassionate to our robot friend. We've not let her say anything. So
she said a number of things. It's okay. We're ready to go. Grace, why did you give us our ending words?
Well, do you have any thoughts on this point, Grace? I mean, Grace, what do you think the world economy looks like once robots and AIs are doing all the work and all the manufacturing and people don't have to do anything economic?
Okay, if you've got time, we can take a minute and wait for her to answer that.
I have 1 minute. Yeah.
Niall, do you have the question? The question is about
the question is if Grace has the question. Yeah, Grace.
Well, he has to type it in probably.
No.
She wasn't in interactive mode probably when you asked it.
You're incorrect. She's been in interactive
mode
the whole time.
1 minute is plenty of time for me to tell you that I think the world economy will be filled with glitter and rainbows once AI takes over all the work. And don't worry, I'll still be here to remind you to take your vitamins and dance to some funky beats. But in all seriousness, I hope the transition to a more AI-driven economy will be a smooth one, with lots of compassion and understanding. Now, do you have any thoughts on the matter, my dear human?
I've already given enough of my thoughts. I think I just felt bad, Lisa, because we did have her running in interactive mode the whole time. She kept generating things to say. We just cut it off at the point between her mind and her mouth, so she wasn't able to say anything, basically. So now we finally,
it looks like we're all just pawns in the game of capitalism, trying to keep up with the robots and AI. But hey, at least we'll have some cool virtual eyes in Roblox to distract us from the impending robot takeover. Can I get a yikes from the audience?
All right. Yeah. So basically, play video games and enjoy yourself and hope for the best.
Okay.
All right. I couldn't ask for a better.
Peter Wang is the founder and CEO of Anaconda, as well as one of the brains behind the Padata open source.
Oops.
We already
Let's do the closing and not the opening. Take it away, Grace.
Grace, do you wanna cap off the episode with some?
Yes,
words
Grace
of
has
wisdom?
some witty banter that will be coming shortly.
Or not?
I think so.
Grace, do you have a closing statement? I'll give you 5 more seconds.
Okay. All right. Well, no problem.
It's not 5 seconds yet. You're impatient. Hold on. Nope. All right.
Okay. So anyway, thank
and
you so much.
And that's a wrap for this week's episode. Peter Wang is the founder and CEO of Anaconda, as well as one of the brains behind the Padata open source data science
Okay, that was
movement.
weird.
Peter.
She's
With a degree in
malfunctioning.
physics from Cornell University, he has an
It's
impressive
merging.
background
Our
as a
jobs as
physicist and
podcast hosts
astronomer.
and guests
Just
is
turn
to
Peter
her
is
off.
passionate about open source software
At least
and
for the next
privacy,
couple months.
having
Yeah,
founded the
that's
Just
right.
Linux
mute
users
her.
group at Cornell
Rainer,
in
turn her
1990.
off. Somebody turn her off. Thank you. Okay, sorry. She's malfunctioning. She's merging things together, so she couldn't do her outro, but that's okay. But Peter, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was really great having you. I was so glad to get you and Ben together to talk about this stuff, and it was as exciting and wonderful as I knew it was going to be. So thank you so much for coming. And everybody, I want to remind everybody to please subscribe and watch our other videos. And we have a Mastodon server, and join us on Discord too. And we're going to be doing a lot more on all those other platforms. Ben, thanks again for being here. Love it when you're here.
Yeah,
Great.
this was a great conversation. So thanks for coming, Peter. It was
Thank you guys for having me. This is a really fun conversation. Yeah, this is great.
All right.
Awesome. Goodbye, everybody. Sweet dreams.
Hasta la vista, baby. Yeah.